In the Middle Ages, everyone had their own cross to bear. Some carried it for Christ and others for a salary. While some knights went on crusades to liberate the Holy Sepulchre, others were hired to guard mosques. Yes, that's right. Christian warriors serving Muslim rulers is not a joke, but a well-documented historical fact. When it came to gold, all those beliefs, religious principles, and holy missions quickly gave way to more enduring values, money and power. And today you'll hear the story of mercenaries who prayed to the cross but served under the crescent. Greetings, friends, and thank you for joining us again on the Amazing History Channel, where the past comes alive and the heroes of the Middle Ages often turn out to be not who they claim to be. Special thanks to our sponsors and patrons. It's thanks to you that we continue to uncover little-known but incredibly fascinating pages of history. If you also want to support the project, all the links are as usual in the description. Now, let's get started. So, Tunis, 1470. The Mediterranean Sea is teeming with ships everywhere. The scent of spices, Aragonese wine, and business conversations in half a dozen dialects. So, here arrives the diplomat of Duke Karl, a sophisticated European, used to seeing the differences between his own people and outsiders. Imagine his surprise when he was shown a quarter where Latins lived, fair-skinned men with hoods instead of turbans, in houses with crosses on the doors. They pray in Latin, but no one really remembers what the songs are about, and just to be sure, they cross themselves facing east. At first, the ambassador thought he had ended up in some kind of Christian colony, but then he found out more. No, they aren't monarchs or missionaries. They're descendants of mercenaries who once served a Muslim ruler. Back then, when Europe was seriously debating who was holier, the Pope or the King. Their ancestors once came here for temporary work, but ended up staying forever, because, as we know, temporary jobs tend to become permanent. If the pay is steady, and apparently they were paid quite well. For their loyal service, their ancestors were given their own houses, a church, and a separate neighborhood, which was nearly aristocratic by local standards. These people had long forgotten the language their great-grandfather prayed in, but they knew exactly how much a barrel of olive oil cost and what a gold diner looked like. For Muslim rulers, they were ideal, unaffiliated with tribal clans and uninvolved in palace intrigues. If needed, they could behead an enemy without hesitation, then drink wine to their employer's health. A mystery for Europe. Christians who guard the Sultan, collect taxes from Muslims, and even sometimes fight against other Muslims. But if you think about it, there's nothing surprising about this. The Middle Ages were a time when ideology ended where the money began. If a crusade gave you a chance to get into heaven, then serving the emirs guaranteed a very earthly bonus, a bag of gold and a roof over your head. Our story begins in a neighborhood like this, where church hymns mixed with the call to prayer. The story of how Christian knights learned to profit from jihad, the story of Christian mercenaries in Muslim service, begins not with faith, but with geography and economics. In the 11th century, the Mediterranean Sea was busy with merchants, Bedouins, and crowded pilgrims. In those days, on a single trip, you could bring back incense from Alexandria, weapons from Genoa, and fresh rumors from Constantinople and other countries. There was a market for everything, with daily trade routes crossing Islamic territories and the minor straits, fueled by hopes for profit and mobile sea intelligence. Not surprising for the Middle Ages, they fought among themselves, with neighbors, and within their tribes, always needing disciplined fighters. The local Berbers fought bravely, of course, but not always in an organized way, while European warriors, especially the Catalans and Normans, were famous for their ability to maintain formation. That's how it was. Demand met supply. Some possessed the golden power, others had the sword and hunger. The first contracts were simple. You fight, we pay, no crosses, no crescents, just mutually beneficial business. Today, mercenaries sign non-disclosure agreements, but in the 12th century, they swore on the sword or the Quran if the Sultan paid well. Some saw it as a betrayal of faith, but to the mercenaries it was simply providing military services. Here's how the phenomenon began that puzzled chroniclers. Christians guarding Muslim palaces, patrolling caravans, and taking cities where the azan is heard. But in that era, it didn't really surprise anyone. Everyone knew the value of the words faith and profit, because for a good fee, even a knight could set aside the cross for better times. But all these nameless wars are just the background. History comes alive when a specific name appears, a person whose fate is worthy of an entire novel. His name was Reveter de la Guardia, a Catalan aristocrat, a man from an old but already impoverished family. At first he was a vassal of the Counts of Barcelona, then a prisoner of the Muslims, and eventually became their chief military commander. So, the path was roughly like this, from feudal lord to captivity, from captivity to a general's tent. But let's take it step by step. This happened during turbulent times, when the Mediterranean Sea didn't divide its shores into Christian and Muslim, but simply fed those who were braver. Catalan knights often went out to sea back then, sometimes to guard trade caravans, sometimes to raid the Berber coasts. Reveter, like many nobles, viewed this as an opportunity to restore his family's influence, but luck deserted him one day. The Almoravid dynasty fleet, rulers of North Africa and Andalusia, intercepted the Catalan ships off the coast. The battle was especially dramatic. Reveter ended up a prisoner and was taken across the sea to Marrakesh, the capital of the Almoravids. Sultan Ali ibn Yusuf, a calculating man, quickly saw he faced not just a warrior, but a disciplined commander skilled in strategy and feudal hierarchy. If God decided to send him an experienced European, then why argue with fate? Thus, the prisoner was not given chains, but was assigned to train Muslim warriors, instill order in warfare, and command those whom he had called enemies just yesterday. Discipline was a challenge for the Almoravids. The Berbers, key to their army, were skilled warriors but also headstrong, hot-tempered, and accustomed to freedom and tribal ways. They disliked orders but loved improvisation, and Reveter excelled at turning chaos into order. The Sultan soon saw that, although the stranger rarely spoke, the soldiers listened when he did. He was first given command of a small group of Russian mercenaries, who were prisoners or defectors. When messengers reported the uprising of a new force, the religious movement of Almohadov, which called for purifying the faith and overthrowing the old power, the Sultan already knew whom to turn to. Thus, the former Catalan knight became the commander-in-chief of the Almoravid forces. For Reveter, war was not a sacred duty, but a profession. Each campaign started with drums summoning warriors, the imam's prayer, and scribes reviewing reward lists. The Almoravid army under his command began to resemble a living mechanism. Reveter demanded that the warriors not rush into battle on impulse but move in formation, that the supply train arrive on time, and that the wounded not be left lying under the sun. For the local commanders, all this seemed overly Frankish, but it was precisely this cold arithmetic that allowed them to defeat the fanatical Almohads, who went into battle shouting about the purity of faith. Reveter's influence grew with each campaign. The Christian mercenaries received their own banner, a quarter by the walls of Marrakesh, and their own church, tiny, but with a bell that rang next to the muezzin. These people prayed in Latin, not understanding the words, and received their pay in gold, the meaning of which they understood perfectly. For the Sultan, they became what the Swiss would later be for European kings, a dependable but costly elite. Rumors about the Frankish commander even reached the Almohads. In their chronicles, he was called a tyrant or a villain, which by the standards of that time could be considered a compliment. They only wrote about those they feared. In every new battle, the Christians under his command became the living shield of the Sultan, the center around which the Muslim units maneuvered, pretended to retreat, and then closed in for another attack. The tactics later detailed by Ibn Khaldun became classic. The Franks held the line as the Berbers attacked from the flanks. Between campaigns, Reveter always remembered his identity and origins. When the drums stopped and the heat rose in Marrakesh, he sat in a tense shade and wrote to his suzerain. In Catalonia, these letters have been preserved, and one of them is dated 1126. Reveter asked Count Ramon Berenguer III to confirm his estate rights and support his steward. While serving far away in Saracen lands, he vowed to remain a loyal vassal even overseas. Reveter's letters stand out for their calmness, lacking Eastern embellishments, complaints, or excuses. He talks about business as if he never left Barcelona, asked to settle disputes over a mill, return part of the income from a bakery, and punish a couple of local troublemakers who dared to touch his family's land. The contrast is striking. a commander of the Muslim army, managing estates across the Mediterranean Sea. If the title of remote vassal had existed back then, he would have been guilty, he would have been at fault. Apparently, the Count did not consider him a traitor. There are no hints of condemnation in the letters. On the contrary, Reveter receives confirmation of his rights and support in the courts. So, serving the Muslims was not considered a complete downfall. If you kept benefiting the house and remembered who granted your title, it was an acceptable compromise in the Middle Ages. If you keep your word, it doesn't matter whose tent you stay in. Reveter operated on two fronts, building connections for the family business in Marrakesh, possibly acquiring a house and second family in Catalonia, managing estates via trusted agents, and ordering grain sales during poor harvests. If the chronicles are accurate, one manager even visited Morocco with reports and money, a medieval example of management without accounting or telephones. This correspondence is not just a document, it reveals a rare detail of an era when the boundaries between enemy and neighbor were much thinner than they seem. Marrakesh and Barcelona were worlds apart, yet goods, people, and letters regularly moved between them. While zealots on both sides debated saving souls, practical people like Reveter focused on saving property, reputation, and their families. Any service sooner or later turns into a trial, especially if your victories no longer save those who pay you. By the mid-12th century, Reveter kept fighting the Almohads, but the war's outcome was set. The Almoravid Empire was collapsing from within, court luxury drained the army, gold couldn't replace faith, and Reveter, still loyal to order, grew isolated among his soldiers. To the Almohads, he wasn't just an enemy, he symbolized the old world where people fought for money and tolerated different faiths. Now, however, their fanatics were coming to power for whom compromise was a sin and reason a sign of weakness. Reveter understood that everything he had built over the years was crumbling under the blows of those who came not to conquer, but to purify. He knew how it would all end, but he kept fighting. His final campaign, around 1142, took place in northern Morocco, where the Almohads were rallying tribes. Reveter led his remaining army, a mixed group of Berbers, Arabs, and Christians who were once the elite, into the field. The chronicles state the battle was desperate. The Almohads advanced with a fanatical war cry, and Reveter held the line until it was clear victory was impossible. He ordered his men to retreat but stayed behind himself, knightly yet pointless. Thus died a man who lived his life between two worlds. According to Arab chroniclers, his body was crucified. A gesture of despair and a warning. That's what awaits those who serve without faith. For Muslims, he was a dangerous outsider. For Christians, he was too Eastern to be considered one of their own. But perhaps that was exactly where his strength lay. After his death, the world around changed. One of his sons continued to serve under the Almohads, while another son returned to Europe and signed documents with an Arabic signature, as if to remind everyone that the world was now one, no matter how the priests tried to divide it. 100 years after Reveter's death, Christian mercenaries were still serving Muslims, some in Egypt, some in Granada, and some in Tunisia. Their descendants lived between two worlds, where faith was of the heart and bread of the hands. No one remembered their names, but through them one could see how closely Mediterranean cultures had intertwined. Well, that's all from me. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye, everyone.